Today, in the camps of Sabra and Shatila, a large plot of unmarked graves bears witness to those who died in the massacre.
His wife, his daughter.
My daughter.
How many people altogether?
23.
The allegation against Defence Minister Sharon is that he did not order that the Lebanese forces be removed from the camps when he received reports of acts of killing.
It's a sad day because today some of the most courageous Israeli servicemen were dismissed from the service.
They were all found responsible for a massacre. Do not they then deserve to lose their
jobs?
jobs?
No, I'm sorry. None was found responsible for a massacre.
But Mr. Ahmed, what you've been saying to me is that this report is going to change very little.
I think that we have been very courageous in exposing ourselves to a very painful and unpleasant investigation.
After the initial shock, the Palestinians are terrified of more killings. Men, women and children fled Shatila this morning after reports that the right-wing Christian militia, the Phalange, who've been blamed for the killings, had moved armed men back into their area. At Sabra, they dug out 150 more bodies today. Red Cross workers say there will be many others. They say that the killers had gone to great lengths to bury the evidence of what happened. Hysterical women who survived the massacre have refused to leave, and their wailings have not stopped since the shootings. Many of the victims are said by the Red Cross to have been buried in mass graves, but there are conflicting reports about the extent of mutilations to some of the corpses. The Israelis said yesterday that they had ordered a major withdrawal of their forces from the refugee camps, leaving the work to the relief organisations, the civil defence and the Lebanese army. But after the reports today that the Phalange were in the Shatila camp once more, Israeli tanks moved back into the Palestinian areas to support Lebanese army units. In fact, the Israeli withdrawal at present appears to have been little more than a cosmetic gesture. Survivors today began picking up their belongings from Sabra. This is how one Lebanese officer described what they'd left behind.
It's terrible. It's terrible what... I have been a surgeon for 30 years. I have seen war. I have seen the most awful things, but this is the hell of Dante.
It will be many more days before the death toll is known. It's already reached 500. But the Lebanese army are now trying to prevent any more coverage of the killings by closing the areas and imposing new curfew laws. If, as they've said, the Israelis' conquest of the city was to prevent a renewed outbreak of civil war, then they have clearly made a grave mistake. And it's amid the confusion and more detailed accounts of what happened in the carnage that Lebanon hopes to appoint a new president-elect tomorrow. If, as expected, it's Amin Gemayel, then his job of ending what he's called this bloody war will be even more difficult than it would have been a week ago when his brother was assassinated. Brent Sadler, News at 10 in West Beirut. Okay.
There's no doubt that these preliminary findings by the Commission are extremely damning against the Prime Minister, Mr. Begin, and against the Defence Minister, Mr. Sharon, the man who's regarded as the architect of the Lebanon war, and against the top 4 men in the Israeli army. Constitutionally, what's happened is this. The Commission is obliged to inform anyone who seems likely to be harmed by its judgment in order that those people have a chance to defend themselves. They now, with the help of a lawyer if they wish, have to try and disprove the allegations against them. The Prime Minister, Mr. Begin, has to refute the following charge, that he did not appropriately consider the role to be played by the Lebanese forces, that's Israel's Christian allies, during the Israeli army's entry into West Beirut, and that he ignored the danger of acts of revenge and bloodshed by these forces against the population in the refugee camps. In other words, he should have anticipated there was the danger of a massacre in West Beirut. The allegation against Defence Minister Sharon is more wide-ranging. The Commission's words are that he ignored or dismissed from his mind the danger of acts of revenge and bloodshed, and that he did not order the appropriate measures to be taken to prevent this danger, and in addition, that he did not order that the Lebanese forces be removed from the camps as quickly as possible when he received reports of acts of killing. The charges against the Army Chief of Staff, General Raful Aitan, go even further, that he didn't check out reports reaching him about the massacre, that he didn't order the Lebanese forces out of the camps, and even that he ordered those forces to be given assistance. The Director of Military Intelligence, General Segui, is accused of overlooking the dangers of the massacre and of not warning the government. The head of Mossad, Israel's military secret service, has to defend himself against the same allegations. And the Commission have also pointed the finger at the Army's northern commander and the commanding officer in Lebanon, and finally at the Foreign Minister, Mr. Shamir, for not bringing to the attention of the Prime Minister reports of a possible massacre. The Commission spells it out. If Mr. Begin, Mr. Sharon and the others can't disprove these allegations, and they've got 15 days to do it, then they'd be held to have failed in their duty. For the army officers, it would be the end of their careers. The Prime Minister, the Defence Minister and the Foreign Minister, the men who, more than all others, have been responsible for the way the Lebanon war has been conducted, and the men responsible, for instance, for the Israeli government's hard line on President Reagan's peace initiative, those men would almost certainly have to resign.
Today, in the camps of Sabra and Shatila, a large plot of unmarked graves bears witness to those who died in the massacre. Here, just the brown Palestinian flag of mourning and a few wreaths on the spot where more than 300 people were buried. But nearby at the public cemetery, relatives of victims came to mourn some of the 50-odd others buried here. There is personal and communal grief because it was such a massacre on such a scale. Inside Sabra's nursery school, which only reopened this week, the most poignant sight of all, a whole class of children made orphans by the massacre. All of them now well-fed and well-cared for, maybe, but the few foreign relief workers here say a sense of hopelessness remains, destroying this community.
They're hopeless. There's no hope. I think things are worse now than they were during the war.
Now it's worse?
Now it's worse, yes. At least during the war they were able to fight. Now they have everything around them. They can't fight.
In many respects, life is as difficult as it ever was last summer. Water's still in short supply. Power cuts sometimes last all day and every day. And now there's a massive job of rebuilding to be done in areas devastated by the massacre and the war. The lack of manpower is all too evident. Today, at least, though, there is security in the form of the Italian units from the multinational force. The very units pulled out a few days before the massacre. They stand guard at every entrance to the camp. The Italians have worked hard at building up a relationship of trust and faith, which would have been unthinkable last summer. This morning they were joined by a small contingent of British troops, 100 men from the Queen's Dragoon Guards, many of them just finished with a tour of duty in Northern Ireland. Here they'll find a sectarian and political divide on a scale unimaginable even in Ulster. It might look like a token offering to the job of keeping the peace in Beirut, but the presence alone of troops from yet another foreign country is seen here as symbolic of a common wish in the world at large to maintain the peace and prevent any repetition of what happened last September. David Smith, News at 10, Beirut.
Well, ultimately, I think that the cabinet under Mr. Begin will continue to serve. I mean, that's as far as the political side of it is concerned. I guess you are concerned with the specific recommendations of the report.
Indeed.
Well, then, I think basically the cabinet will adopt the basic recommendations that are included in the report, but that must be waited until tomorrow before we have exactly the opinion of the government.
When you say you expect the government to accept the recommendations of the report, do you expect Mr. Sharon to be sacked or to resign?
Well, I draw your attention to the wording of the committee itself. The committee does not call Mr. Sharon directly to resign, or even does not recommend to Mr. Begin that he will fire him. It is a very careful wording coming from people who are extremely sensitive to the use of words. They say that they expect Mr. Sharon himself to draw the personal conclusions under the circumstances that they have described. And only if it will be needed, they call Mr. Begin to consider the possibility of using the Article 20 in the law, which allows him to fire a minister. In other words, unlike the recommendations towards other personalities, where they say directly, rather bluntly, that they should end their service. In the case of Mr. Sharon himself, they call for personal conclusions that he will draw. And we, first of all, have to wait and see what kind of position Mr. Sharon himself will adopt. I don't expect Mr. Begin to fire him. In fact, I think he already said today that he is not going to fire him.
Do you see this as a problem for his party, or specifically a problem for individuals in it?
I would like to go further and say that I think it's a problem for the country. It's not a happy day in Israel, it's a sad day. It's a sad day because today some of the most courageous Israeli servicemen, generals, fighters were dismissed from the service. I'm talking about the chief of staff. I'm talking about the chief of the Israeli intelligence. I'm talking about the chief of the division in the north. All of them are bright, courageous, and decent soldiers of the state of Israel. And
they were all found responsible for a massacre. Do not they then deserve to lose their jobs?
No, I'm sorry. I'm very sorry that quite carelessly the use of words that you do is adding into the aggravation. That none was found responsible for a massacre because the massacre was originally not committed by Israelis, was done by the Phalangists, by the Christians against the Muslims. None of the Israeli soldiers was found directly or indirectly involved. And it is emphasized by the committee. I refer you to page 52 and 51 in the report in the English version, where it says that there was found no kind of conspiracy whatsoever between any political or military echelons of the Israelis to end the Phalangists in bringing about the massacre. The responsibility that was found was for not having prevented the massacre, for having an error of judgment in not foreseeing that it may happen. This is a completely different responsibility in nature. None of the Israelis was found responsible to the massacre. They were found responsible for not doing what they may have been able to do under the circumstances to prevent it in advance.
But Mr. Ahmed, the whole theme of what you've been saying to me is that this report is going to change very little.
Well, I think that this report will definitely have an impact. It will sharpen sensitivities. It will teach a lesson to people in important positions while operating in exercising their authorities. But what I think most of the people, especially from outside, expected, if I may say it bluntly but frankly, I think they expected Begin to be dismissed. Really what they wanted is a changeover in the Israeli government. Let me remind you, we are a democracy. Ultimately, the people will decide which government they want. And if this was the expectation, then yes, indeed, I believe that there will be a certain frustration. But I think that we have been very courageous in exposing ourselves to a very painful and unpleasant investigation, and we have taken the burden of going into all the details. The Prime Minister of the state, the Minister of Defense, the Foreign Minister, all the highest ranked generals were called for open and public investigation in court and were cross-examined. This is a process, the parallel of which you have never found in any other countries, in the democracies in the Western Europe or in America. This was an important manifestation of the Israeli democracy in action. And this in itself is extremely important lesson for the future.
Mr. Ahmed, thank you very much for talking to us.
You're welcome.
A year on, we return to Sabra and Shatila, picking our way through the streets still devastated, where a year ago today, a massacre that shook so many consciences took place. To find those like Suhair Mohammed, the only survivor of a family that lost 23 men, women and children in the massacre.
Could he show us?
مرتي وبنتي اثنين.
That is his wife?
His wife,
My
his
wife,
daughter,
my daughter,
these
children, my daughter. my brother and family, my brother, son, my brother, my son.
How many people altogether?
23.
Nearby we found Khaled Abdullah. You don't need to speak Arabic to understand what happened to his father. Khaled's 3 sisters all lost husbands. 2 of them lost their children. Today they leave the camps every night to sleep at the houses of friends outside because they still fear the Christians and another massacre. Khaled sums up the feelings of everyone here. Only the multinational force, he says, stands between us and another massacre. The Italians are the unit of the multinational force assigned to the Palestinian camps today. They have 2,000 men in and around Sabra and Shatila, and in the past couple of weeks, as the war outside has escalated, they've stepped up patrols, sealing off the entire area. The Italians are specially chosen for this job, their personality and their character being the main prerequisites for building up a relationship of mutual trust that is evident on almost every street corner. But much as the Italians have done everything they can, their mobile clinics handle dozens of patients every day. They know they are only scratching away at the surface. The deep-rooted problems of the camps remain. Because a year on from the massacre, a year on from the departure of the PLO, the Palestinian civilians remain a people without a home to call their own, only this. Many of them are still living in abject poverty. Here it's the basement of a disused tenement block. And in their own minds at least, they are quite literally caged in. Unwanted, even despised they feel by the Lebanese. Take Zuhair Mohammed, for example, the man who lost 23 relatives. A year ago he had a shop. 6 months ago his work permit was withdrawn by the government, no explanation given. He now lives alone, totally dependent on the charity of friends. And totally dependent, like everyone else here, on the Italians for security. Yet everyone knows that sooner or later the multinational force will have to go, leaving behind them a people and camps, where today the huge, unmarked and untended graveyard, in which hundreds were buried a year ago, stands somehow as a symbol of the decay and the neglect which afflicts those who survived. David Smith, ITN, Beirut.